Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, everyone. Today we're unpacking an absolute masterclass in brevity and depth. We're looking at Dr. Israr Ahmed's profound analysis of Surah Al-Asr. Now, this is the Quran's shortest, yet arguably its most astonishing chapter. If you've ever wondered how massive, literal life and death existential concepts can be compressed into just a handful of words, well, you're definitely in the right place.
Think about this quote from Imam Shafi, who is obviously a towering figure in Islamic jurisprudence. He once said, "If nothing else was revealed but this surah, it would be enough for the guidance of humanity." Just let the sheer weight of that statement sink in for a second. The entire blueprint of a faith, the ultimate guide for human existence, packed into just 3 brief verses. It's honestly staggering to think about the level of comprehensiveness required to make that claim true.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the power of these 3 verses, look at their 4 unique characteristics, dive into the great human tragedy, face the grand accountability, and finally uncover the 4 pillars of success. Moving right along to sections 1 and 2. Power and characteristics, the structural marvels of the shortest chapter. All right, before we get into the actual meaning of the verses, we really need to understand the fascinating structural makeup of this chapter and exactly why it holds such a unique place in the Quran. Dr. Israr Ahmed actually identifies 4 distinct characteristics here. First off, it's literally the briefest of chapters. The absolute minimum length for any surah in the Quran is 3 verses, and Al-Asr sits right at that exact minimum. Second, chronologically speaking, it's among the earliest revelations. Third, it's remarkably easy to understand. And fourth, it's the most comprehensive. I mean, it serves almost as a complete index of the entire Quranic message. And it opens with this startling wake-up call of an oath, by time, or time is witness. It's just this sudden, arresting statement that practically demands your immediate attention. Now, what's really interesting here is a brilliant analogy Dr. Isra Ahmed uses to explain exactly why these early short chapters are so vital. Think of a mango seed. It's small, it's compact, right? But it contains the entire genetic blueprint of the future plant. When you plant it, it sprouts leaves, a trunk, and eventually fruit. These early revelations are just like that seed. Short, sure, but infinitely profound. On the flip side, we have the full tree. That represents the later, much longer chapters, like Surah Baqarah, that span over many pages and years of revelation. But here's the thing. The tree is simply the detailed unfolding of what was already packed inside the tiny seed of chapters like Al-Asr. And that actually brings us to a really beautiful literary concept known as Sahal Mumtani. It roughly translates to deceptively simple. See, when you read Surah Al-Asr in Arabic or Urdu, nearly every single word, like Asr for time, Insan for humanity, Sabr for patience. These are highly familiar in everyday, ordinary language. You're not looking at any linguistic riddles here. But, and this is crucial, that simplicity is an illusion. The concepts carry impossible depth and truly limitless meaning. It is just so perfectly composed that trying to replicate its effortless depth is, well, it's basically impossible. Okay, moving to section 3, the great human tragedy, the universal baseline of human existence. The tone of the chapter shifts right here. And so we kind of have to shift our tone too. We're diving into the central existential conflict of this explainer to understand the gritty reality of the human condition, at least according to this text. Grammatically speaking, these 3 short verses actually form a single unbroken sentence. And sitting right there in the middle, serving as the absolute emotional core of the whole thing, is this incredibly devastating phrase, Insan lafi khusr. Indeed, mankind is in immense loss. And we're not talking about a minor setback here. The grammatical structure emphasizes a profound catastrophic loss. Dr. Israr Ahmed refers to this as the great human tragedy, because the default state of humanity without any sort of intervention is simply ruin. But this concept of khusr, this deep loss, it isn't an isolated idea at all. It heavily connects to universal observations of human suffering all across history. I mean, look at this conclusion. Sarvam dukkam, all is pain, all is suffering. That was a conclusion reached by Buddha after he left his palace and actually observed the illness, aging, and death that afflicts mankind. Even the incredibly famous poet Ghalib noted that life and grief are just inextricably bound together. This earthly suffering literally spares no one. It doesn't spare the physically exhausted laborer breaking his back for a single meal, and it definitely doesn't spare the mentally anguished elite tossing and turning in air-conditioned rooms, relying on sleeping pills just to get through the night. The tragedy of pain is, quite frankly, the universal baseline of human existence.
This brings us to Section 4, the grand accountability, the terrifying reality beyond earthly suffering. But the earthly suffering we just discussed, that's really only the beginning. Let's slow down for a second because the sheer gravity of this next point is absolutely central to the entire chapter. We are shifting from the physical suffering of this world to a truly staggering theological reality. So I want to ask you directly, what could possibly be worse than the baseline suffering of human existence? I mean, if illness, grief, and physical exhaustion are our default state, what is the ultimate tragedy waiting beyond that?
Well, the answer is grand accountability, or Jawab-Dahi. Dr. Israr Ahmed explains that unlike animals or plants, which, simply die and turn to dust, humans face divine judgment. We will be resurrected to answer for every single atom of good and bad we ever committed. Did we seek the truth? Did we actually uphold justice? This reality is so overwhelmingly heavy, so genuinely terrifying, that the first caliph Abu Bakr, despite his immense legendary piety, he actually used to say he wished he were just a mere bird chirping in a tree, or a single blade of grass. Why? Just so he wouldn't have to face this ultimate grand accounting.
And now, the final piece, Section 5. 4 Pillars of Success, the definitive escape route.
Okay, so we've explored the depths of the human tragedy and the incredible weight of grand accountability. But thankfully, this chapter doesn't just leave us in despair. There is an escape route, and it hinges entirely on one pivotal word, illa. It translates to accept. Humanity is an immense loss, except. This right here is the divine exception. Everything we just talked about, the tragedy, the ruin, that's the overarching rule for humanity. But this single word, illa, it brilliantly illustrates the exact necessary blueprint for salvation.
So what are the conditions of that exception? They are the 4 pillars of success. And I want you to notice how they beautifully build in sequence. First up is iman, or faith. This is your internal individual belief. But as we know, belief isn't quite enough on its own, right? So it moves to step 2, amal al-saliyah, righteous deeds. You actually have to act on your faith. Then it expands outward to society in step 3, tawasib al-haq, exhorting the truth. You can't just be good in isolation, you have to actively invite others to the truth. And finally, step 4, tawasib as-sabr, exhorting patience. These 4 pillars right here, they are the mandatory requirements to escape the human tragedy. Now, the absolute crucial point here is understanding exactly why the final 2 pillars are paired together like this. On one hand, sharing the bitter truth naturally and inevitably invites intense opposition. Dr. Israr Ahmed points out that when you stand up for what is right in society, you are going to face pushback and hardship, for sure. Therefore, the pillar of exhorting patience becomes absolutely mandatory. You literally cannot survive the pushback of spreading the truth without mutual endurance and patience. They act as a symbiotic pair. Engaging in one pretty much guarantees you're going to need the other. Which ultimately brings us to the big question we must all ask ourselves today. Are you actively building these 4 pillars, faith, righteous deeds, truth, and patience, in your own life? Or are you passively allowing yourself to be part of that default human tragedy? The structure is deceptively simple. The words are incredibly easy, but the application, well, that requires a lifetime of dedication. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.